Hello everyone, this is Mind Sweet Revenge. Before I begin, tell me, where are you listening from today? My name is Richard Coleman, and what I'm about to share is not just a story about a wedding. It's a story about pride, betrayal, and the painful moment when money could not buy back respect. Like any father, I had always dreamed of the day I would walk my daughter down the aisle. For years, I saved, I worked, I sacrificed, because when that moment came, I wanted her to have nothing but the very best. I imagined the joy on her face, the way her eyes would sparkle as she stepped into her new life. And when the time finally arrived, I was ready to spend $100,000, a lifetime of savings, just to make sure her happiness was complete. Her fiancé, Daniel, entered our lives with the charm and confidence of a man who seemed to have it all together. He was polite, articulate, and carried himself like someone who belonged to a higher social circle. My daughter adored him, and although deep down I sometimes noticed an arrogance in the way he spoke, I brushed it aside. If he made my daughter happy, wasn't that enough? From the very beginning, Daniel's world revolved around appearances. He cared about presentation, about social media, about how people would talk about him. "This wedding has to look perfect," he would say. I thought it was normal. After all, weddings are big events, and everyone wants them to be memorable. So I didn't question it. The preparations were massive. We booked the grandest hall in the city. The chandeliers sparkled like stars. The marble floors shone as though polished by angels, and the floral arrangements alone could have been displayed in a royal palace. A live orchestra was set to play. The menu was custom designed, with every detail tailored for elegance. Guests were flying in from different corners of the world. Designer dresses, tailored suits, expensive gifts, everything screamed extravagance. And through it all, I was proud. Yes, the money drained my savings. Yes, it meant I would have to start again financially. But I didn't care. This was for my daughter. Seeing her smile would be worth every penny. But the warning signs were there, hidden in plain sight. Daniel had an obsession with status. He spoke too often about important people and who truly belonged at events. I noticed how he dismissed certain relatives of mine as ordinary and preferred to invite his colleagues and high-profile contacts instead. My heart grew uneasy, but I convinced myself it was just nerves, just part of his personality. Then came the night before the wedding. We were gathered for a pre-wedding dinner. The atmosphere was light, laughter filled the air, glasses clinked, and my daughter's eyes sparkled with nervous joy. I looked at her and thought, tomorrow will be the happiest day of her life, and then Daniel shattered it all. Leaning back in his chair, casually swirling his drink, he spoke words that cut through me like ice. The table fell silent. My daughter's smile froze, her lips parting as if she wanted to protest, but couldn't find the words. I stared at him, my chest tightening. Important people. What did that mean? I searched his face, hoping it was a joke, some careless remark, but no. His expression was deliberate, his tone firm, his arrogance unmistakable. At that moment, everything I had worked for felt worthless. The flowers, the music, the food, the polished venue, it all seemed empty. Because for the first time I realized, this wedding wasn't about love, it was about image, about control, about arrogance. And yet, as heavy as his words were, I couldn't have imagined the storm that was coming. By dawn, the $100,000 wedding would vanish into thin air. That night, after Daniel's careless words, the air at the table grew heavy. Laughter disappeared. My daughter tried to brush it off with a forced smile, but her hands fidgeted nervously in her lap. I knew her well enough to see the storm behind her eyes. I didn't want to ruin the evening, so I stayed quiet. I told myself, perhaps he didn't mean it. Perhaps it was the wine. Maybe tomorrow will be different. But deep down, I felt a crack forming in the very foundation of what was supposed to be a joyous celebration. When the dinner ended, I walked my daughter to the car. She clutched my arm tightly, as if holding on to the comfort she desperately needed. "Dad," she whispered, "you think everything will be okay tomorrow, right?" Her question pierced my heart. She wanted reassurance, a promise that all would be fine. And even though doubt gnawed at me, I smiled, kissed her forehead and said, "Yes, sweetheart, tomorrow will be perfect." But as I watched her drive away with Daniel, my chest felt heavier than ever. The next morning began with chaos. I woke early, determined to make sure every last detail was in place. The venue was ready, the decorations flawless, and the orchestra had already begun their warm-up. Staff rushed around with final touches, and for a brief moment, I felt a sense of relief. Everything is as it should be. Then the phone calls began. At first, it was one or two relatives calling, confused. They told me they had been informed by someone on Daniel's side that their invitations were no longer valid. Some said they were told the wedding was being downsized. Others were told outright, "You're not on the list anymore." My heart sank. I rushed to Daniel's suite at the hotel where he was staying. The door was half open, and inside I found him on the phone, speaking with the event manager. His tone was sharp, commanding. I froze in the doorway, stunned. My hands trembled as I listened. He wasn't joking the night before. He wasn't careless. He meant every word. I stepped in, my voice breaking with anger. "Daniel, what are you doing? These are family. These are people who love her, who love us." He turned slowly, his expression cool, almost smug. "Richard, you have to understand. This isn't just a wedding, it's a statement. Do you want this to look like a cheap circus, or do you want it to look powerful, exclusive, important?" My blood boiled. A statement. I had poured my life's savings into this day, and he had the audacity to treat it like some business gala. My daughter wasn't marrying into love, she was marrying into a show. As the hours passed, the disaster grew worse. Relatives I loved, friends I cherished, people who had flown thousands of miles just to celebrate with us, they were being turned away at the gates. Security had been instructed with new lists that excluded more than half the guests. I watched as people argued, pleaded, even cried, but they were still shown the door. My phone buzzed non-stop. Calls, messages, angry voices asking why they were humiliated. I had no answers, only shame. And all the while Daniel carried himself like a king, nodding with approval as the crowd inside grew smaller, more exclusive. He smiled, shaking hands with the wealthy guests who remained, while the ones who truly mattered, family, stood outside in disbelief. My daughter tried to hide her pain, but I saw it. Her smile trembled, her eyes glistened with unshed tears. She looked at me once across the room, her lips quivering, and I wanted nothing more than to take her hand and run far away. Still, I stayed. I stayed because I thought maybe things would settle, maybe the ceremony would still hold meaning, but deep inside, I knew the truth. The heart of this wedding had already been ripped apart, and yet this was only the beginning, because within a few short hours, everything, every dollar, every plan, every dream would come crashing down. By dawn, the $100,000 wedding would no longer exist. The day that was supposed to be the proudest of my life began to feel like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. By midday, the venue looked stunning from the outside. Luxury cars lined the driveway, photographers clicked away, and the orchestra played softly in the background. To any stranger walking past, it looked like perfection. But inside, I saw the cracks that widened with every passing hour. Half the chairs in the grand hall were empty. Rows of seats that should have been filled with family and lifelong friends now sat bare, waiting for guests who had been told they weren't important enough to attend. I could feel the weight of every absence pressing on me, like ghosts hovering over the celebration. Daniel, however, looked pleased. He strutted across the hall like a man who had just won a battle. His suit was sharp, his hair perfect, his smile polished for the cameras. He shook hands with wealthy business partners, laughed with investors, and ignored the whispers of everyone else. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab him by the collar and ask if he had any idea what love meant. But I stayed silent for my daughter's sake. The ceremony began. The music swelled as my daughter appeared at the entrance, radiant in her gown. For a moment my heart lifted. She was breathtaking. Every step she took down the aisle reminded me of the little girl who once clutched my hand and said she would always be my princess. But even through her beauty, I saw her eyes searching the empty rows, searching for the family and friends who should have been there, but weren't. Her smile was fragile, her steps steady but hesitant, as if each one carried the weight of disappointment. When she reached Daniel at the altar, he didn't even glance at the empty seats. He just looked at her with a self-satisfied grin, as if everything was unfolding exactly as he wanted. I clenched my fists. The anger burned inside me, but what could I do? The ceremony continued, words were spoken, vows exchanged, and yet instead of joy, I felt a hollow ache in my chest. The reception was worse. Guests whispered about the missing crowd, about the strange atmosphere. Some asked me directly what had happened. "Richard, why weren't we invited? Why was the list cut?" Their voices carried both confusion and insult. I gave no answers. What could I say? That my future son-in-law had decided who was worthy and who wasn't. Everywhere I turned, I saw judgmental eyes. Not on Daniel, no, he was too busy charming his so-called important people, but on me, as if it was my failure, as if I had excluded them. The humiliation ate at me. I'd spent $100,000, emptied my savings, and poured my soul into this day. And yet, instead of gratitude, instead of joy, I was left standing in the shadows, watching everything unravel. Late in the evening, the tension finally broke. One of my closest cousins, a man who had helped me countless times in life, stormed up to me. His face was red with anger. "Richard, my family was turned away at the door. After everything we've shared, after all these years, this is how you repay us?" I tried to explain, but he wouldn't listen. He shook his head, his voice trembling with hurt. "You've lost my respect." Then he walked out, leaving me standing there, crushed. I turned, desperate for support, but everywhere I looked I saw more angry faces, more disappointment. My phone buzzed again and again. Missed calls, angry messages, relatives demanding answers. 56 missed calls in just a few hours. Each one a reminder of how much was being destroyed. Not just money, but relationships, trust, and dignity. And through it all, Daniel laughed. He laughed with his important people, oblivious to the pain he was causing. My daughter. She tried to smile, but I saw her tears hidden behind her laughter. She avoided my eyes, as if ashamed, as if she didn't know how to face me anymore. That night, as the lights dimmed and the last song of the orchestra played, I sat alone at a corner table. My hands shook, my heart heavy. I had given everything for this day, and yet it had turned into a stage for arrogance and humiliation. I thought it couldn't get worse. I thought the pain had reached its limit. But I was wrong, because before the sun would rise, the wedding itself, this grand, expensive show, would vanish. Not just the guests, not just the respect, but the entire foundation of Daniel's perfect image, and I would watch it crumble with my own eyes. The night fell, and with it, a strange silence settled over what was supposed to be the happiest day of my daughter's life. The grand hall was empty now, the echoes of the laughter that never truly existed fading into the cold air. The orchestra had packed up, vendors had left, and the glittering decorations, once symbols of our dedication, stood abandoned like ghosts of a dream that never came true. I sat in the corner of the empty room, the weight of humiliation pressing down on me. 56 missed calls, messages full of anger and confusion, all unanswered. People who had traveled miles, people who had been part of our family for decades, turned away. And through it all, Daniel's arrogance had not wavered for a second. I thought about my daughter, my little girl, who once clung to my hand, laughing and spinning in the garden. I thought about the sacrifices I had made for her. Late nights, endless work, giving up my own dreams so that she could have opportunities I never had. I had done everything to ensure that she would feel loved, respected and celebrated, and then, in a single moment, it all seemed meaningless. She entered the room still wearing her gown, the edges smudged with tears she had tried to hide. Her shoulders slumped, but she held her head high, a mixture of defiance and heartbreak in her eyes. She didn't speak at first. She only walked over to me and sat down, burying her face in her hands. I put my arm around her, my voice trembling. "It's okay, sweetheart. It's not your fault." She lifted her head, and for the first time I saw the full weight of her despair. "Dad, how could he?" she whispered. "All this for what? For him to humiliate us like this?" I didn't have an answer. How do you explain to a child, your child, that some people measure everything by money and status? That love, respect, and loyalty can be tossed aside like trash when someone wants to feel powerful? Daniel had left hours ago. I don't even know where he went. The people he considered important were gone too, their faces smug, satisfied that they had played a part in his little game. And the rest of us, we were left with ashes of what was supposed to be a day of joy. I spent that night pacing the empty hall, thinking about every small sign I had ignored, every arrogant word Daniel had spoken, every time he had dismissed someone as unimportant during the planning. I had told myself I was overthinking, that I was being paranoid, but I wasn't paranoid. I was blind to the truth that had been staring me in the face all along. And yet, in that darkness, a new thought began to form. If pride could destroy a $100,000 wedding in a single night, then truth, reality, could restore balance. If arrogance could humiliate us, then consequences could teach lessons no words ever could. I didn't know exactly how or when, but I felt it. That what Daniel had done would not go unchallenged. Meanwhile, my daughter sat quietly beside me. She was exhausted, heartbroken, but also beginning to understand something important. Not all battles are fought with money. Not all respect is bought. And some lessons, though painful, are necessary. We talked for hours that night. Not about how expensive the flowers were or how many guests had been turned away. We talked about values, about pride, about dignity, about what truly mattered in life. And in that conversation, a seed was planted, a seed that would grow into a decision neither Daniel nor anyone else would forget. Because tomorrow, the real challenge would begin, the challenge of standing firm, of teaching a lesson that words could never convey, of showing that respect is never demanded, it is earned. And I knew, deep down, that when Daniel faced reality, he would see just how wrong he had been. The next morning arrived with a strange quiet, a silence that felt heavier than any noise I had ever heard. The wedding that was supposed to be the pinnacle of my daughter's happiness had turned into chaos overnight. Vendors were calling me frantically, some saying that Daniel had cancelled contracts, others claiming payments had been reversed. Staff who were supposed to arrive at dawn refused to show up, citing last-minute instructions from him. By the time I reached the hall, my worst fears were confirmed. Tables stood empty, floral arrangements toppled, and the once beautiful venue looked like a stage abandoned after a play had ended badly. Half of the guests had already received messages. Due to unforeseen circumstances, your presence is no longer required. The wedding has been downsized. I could barely comprehend the magnitude of it. 56 missed calls from relatives and friends were flashing on my phone. Angry texts, confused emails, desperate pleas, all ignored by the man who was supposed to be marrying my daughter. Daniel appeared a few moments later, perfectly dressed as if nothing was wrong. He walked past the chaos with a smug smile, greeting a handful of important guests who had remained on his arbitrary list. I couldn't hold back any longer. I approached him, my chest tight with anger. "Daniel, what are you doing? Look at this. These people are family, friends. They've come from all over. Why are they being turned away?" He glanced at me, expression calm, almost condescending. "Richard," he said smoothly, "you need to understand. Not everyone is worthy of this celebration. This is not a charity event. Only certain people matter. The rest simply don't." I froze, my hands trembling. "Not a charity? Not everyone matters. Everything I had sacrificed, every sleepless night, every penny I had set aside, it was all being dismissed like it was nothing. My daughter approached, her face pale but resolute. She had overheard our conversation. Her eyes met mine, silently asking what to do, what she should say. She looked at Daniel, and for the first time, I saw hesitation in his posture, but his arrogance didn't falter for long. "It's business, not feelings," he continued. "A wedding is as much about image as it is about emotion. I'm doing what's best for my reputation." At that moment, my heart sank. Not only had he humiliated my family, but he had also revealed the true nature of the man my daughter was about to marry. A man who valued prestige over love, image over loyalty. I took a deep breath, trying to remain composed. I wouldn't let my anger explode in front of my daughter. She needed strength, not tears. I said quietly, "Daniel, if you think you can build a marriage on arrogance and exclusion, you're mistaken. Respect is not given. It is earned. And today you've lost it all." His smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. "You're overreacting. Everything is under control. These decisions were necessary." Necessary. I snapped, my voice louder now. Necessary for what? To make your friends feel special while breaking the hearts of everyone who truly cares. You've spent a night making choices that no money can justify. And tomorrow, or any day after that, the consequences will catch up to you. By mid-afternoon, the full impact of his choices became impossible to ignore. Caterers refused to serve. Some vendors demanded refunds, and the guests who had not been blocked were whispering, uncomfortable with the tension. The $100,000 dream of a perfect wedding was crumbling, piece by piece in front of everyone's eyes. My daughter clutched my hand. "Dad, what do we do?" she asked. I held her close, feeling her pain as if it were my own. "We stay strong," I told her, "and we show him the truth, that arrogance and cruelty can never replace respect and love." And in that moment I knew the battle had only just begun. Daniel's confidence, his carefully curated image, would be tested in ways he could never imagine. Because when pride meets reality, only one survives. By mid-afternoon, the wedding was no longer recognizable. The hall, once glimmering with chandeliers and flowers, had become a scene of confusion. Guests whispered in clusters, unsure where to sit, unsure what had happened to the grand celebration they had been promised. Staff members ran around, frazzled, trying to salvage what little remained. Daniel continued to hold himself like a king surveying his kingdom, oblivious to the chaos around him. But even the most confident facade can crack, and slowly cracks began to appear. The caterers confronted him, demanding explanations. "Sir," one said firmly, "half the guests have been told not to enter. Orders have been changed last minute. We can't serve a wedding like this without causing more problems." Daniel waved them off, brushing it off as minor issues. "Handle it. Make it work. These people don't understand the importance of exclusivity." I stepped in, my voice calm but sharp. "Daniel, it's not minor. This is a disaster. You've humiliated family, friends, and your own fiancé. You wanted exclusivity? Well, reality doesn't work on your terms." At that moment, I saw something shift in the room. Some of his so-called important guests started whispering nervously. They had arrived expecting a flawless, prestigious event. Now they were witnessing the collapse firsthand. The image Daniel had carefully crafted was unraveling, piece by piece. My daughter approached, determination replacing heartbreak. "Daniel," she said quietly but firmly, "I don't know who you think you are impressing, but this isn't love. This isn't respect. And if you can't see that, then maybe this isn't what I want either." His face tightened for a brief moment, a flicker of uncertainty passing over his features. But Daniel's arrogance didn't allow him to show weakness for long. "She's overreacting," he muttered to a guest beside him, trying to regain control. I watched him carefully. Every decision, every smug gesture, every dismissive word was evidence of the man I had been warning my daughter about for months. But this was more than evidence. It was reality crashing down. The vendors started cancelling contracts in real time. Security guards, who had been instructed to block certain guests, refused to comply when confronted with legal threats. Social media posts began to circulate among the remaining guests, exposing the chaos to a wider audience. Daniel's image was slipping faster than he could contain it. I knew I had to act. Not with anger, not with confrontation, but with precision. My daughter deserved to see that actions have consequences. Daniel needed to understand that arrogance and greed cannot override respect and dignity. By evening, the final blow began to take shape. Guests who had been permitted entry started leaving quietly, murmuring about the mismanagement, the humiliation, and the arrogance they had witnessed. What Daniel considered important people were now walking away, unimpressed, dissatisfied, and visibly angry. My daughter looked at me, eyes filled with a mix of relief and sadness.
"Dad, I think he's finally seeing it," she whispered.
I nodded. I could see it too. His confidence, that smug self-assurance, was wavering. And when pride finally meets reality, no mask can protect it. The $100,000 wedding, meant to dazzle and impress, had turned into a lesson Daniel would never forget. He had planned to leave an unforgettable mark, but it was the truth, not his carefully curated image, that was making the lasting impression. That night, as I walked my daughter home from the ruined celebration, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, yes, but also pride. Pride in her strength, in her ability to see reality clearly. Pride in knowing that the lessons she had learned would guide her better than any extravagant display of wealth. And deep down, I knew that Daniel's downfall had only begun. The arrogance that had humiliated so many was now facing the ultimate test, reality. Because when money and image collide with truth, only one survives. And tomorrow, Daniel would learn that lesson in the harshest way possible. By the next morning, the full magnitude of Daniel's decisions was impossible to ignore. News had spread among the remaining guests, vendors, and even nearby venues about the chaos he had caused. The carefully curated image of exclusivity he had tried to craft was now shattered beyond repair. I found Daniel pacing in his suite, phone pressed to his ear, attempting to manage the fallout. Every time he hung up, a frustrated growl escaped his lips. He looked powerful on the outside, but the cracks were visible. The facade was fading, revealing a man unprepared for the reality of his arrogance. I walked in calmly, my presence enough to make him glance up. "Daniel," I said, my voice steady, "it's over. The wedding isn't about your image. It's about people, family, respect, and love. You've destroyed all three in a single night." He laughed nervously, trying to maintain control. "Richard, you don't understand. Everything I did was necessary. This is business. This is prestige. People like you just don't get it." I shook my head, anger rising like a tide. "Don't get it? You're calling love, family, and respect meaningless. You planned this disaster. You humiliated people who've been nothing but loyal to my family. And for what? To impress people who won't even remember this day tomorrow?" Daniel's confidence wavered. I could see it in the tightening of his jaw, the flicker in his eyes. He had always believed his charm and status could protect him, but reality has a way of exposing arrogance, and this time it was relentless. My daughter stepped forward, her voice clear and steady. "Daniel, I trusted you. I believed in you, but this wasn't just about the wedding. This was about how you treat people, and you've shown who you really are." He opened his mouth, tried to speak, but she continued, her words slicing through the tension in the room. "I can't marry someone who thinks respect is optional, who thinks love can be measured in money and appearances. I won't. Not now, not ever." For the first time, Daniel looked completely unguarded. His carefully built persona, the image of control and superiority, was collapsing. He realized that the wealth, the plans, the exclusivity, none of it mattered. What mattered was the human truth he had ignored: respect, trust, and integrity. I stepped closer. "Daniel, Pride meets reality only once, and today is that moment for you. The wedding, the money, the show, it's all gone. What's left is the truth, and the truth is unforgiving. His shoulders slumped. He opened his mouth again, but no words came. The arrogance, the bravado, it had evaporated. My daughter held my hand tightly, and I felt a surge of pride. She had faced heartbreak, humiliation, and disappointment, yet she stood tall, strong, resilient, and in that moment I knew that whatever damage had been done, she would rise above it. By the evening, Daniel left quietly, his departure unnoticed by most. The remaining guests who had endured enough were leaving too, shaking their heads, whispering about the arrogance they had witnessed, and as the door closed behind him, I realized something important. Money, status, and appearances can only carry someone so far. The arrogance that had caused so much pain was now powerless. Respect cannot be demanded, it can only be earned. My daughter turned to me, tears finally breaking free. "Dad, thank you," she whispered, "for standing with me, for showing me what really matters." I hugged her, my heart full despite the ruined day. "Always, sweetheart, some lessons are harsh, but they teach us the most important things in life." And as I looked back at the empty hall, at the scattered flowers, and the silence of a wedding that could have been, I knew one truth would remain with Daniel forever. When pride meets reality, only one survives. The day after the wedding disaster, the house was quiet. The echoes of the chaos still lingered, like shadows reminding us of the arrogance that had tried to overshadow love and respect. My daughter sat beside me, finally able to exhale after the whirlwind of emotions. We didn't need extravagant celebrations anymore. The flowers, the music, the luxury, they all seemed meaningless now. What mattered was what we had learned, the true value of respect, trust, and honesty. Daniel's departure left a mark deeper than any money could cover. Word had spread quickly, and people who had once seen him as impressive now saw him for what he truly was. Someone who measured relationships in dollars and status, invitations ignored, families humiliated, friends insulted. It was a reputation destroyed in hours. I had watched the man who once believed his charm could control the world crumble under the weight of reality. And in that moment I understood something profoundly simple. Wealth and arrogance are temporary. Truth and integrity endure forever. My daughter, holding my hand, looked at me with clarity. "Dad," she said, voice steady, "I understand now what really matters. A wedding, a celebration, these are not about money. They're about people. They're about love, about respect." I smiled, proud beyond words. Exactly. And that is a lesson Daniel will never forget. He treated people like numbers, like props. But life has a way of showing who truly matters and who doesn't. We spent the rest of the day talking, reflecting, and planning for the future. Not a lavish party, not a show for the world, just honesty, humility, and the understanding that relationships are priceless when respect is present. As for Daniel, I heard later from mutual contacts that his so-called important guests were unimpressed. Some refused further contact. Others mocked the arrogance of the man who had thought he could manipulate love and respect with money. He had thought he could control the narrative, but reality, unforgiving and absolute, had rewritten it for him. It was a harsh lesson, and yet it was necessary. Friends, life taught me something in those days that I will never forget. Without respect, everything else is meaningless. Money cannot buy dignity, and status cannot replace integrity. You can plan the most expensive, luxurious events, but if you forget the people who truly matter, you lose everything. My daughter and I emerged from that experience stronger, wiser, and more connected than ever. Daniel, he cannot forget, and he never will, because sometimes the most expensive lessons aren't about money. They're about character, and sometimes silence, patience, and truth are the sharpest weapons of all. The days after the wedding disaster were quiet but full of reflection. My daughter and I spent hours talking, trying to untangle the mess that Daniel had left behind. Every conversation reminded me of the fragility of relationships when respect is absent. Money and appearances might create an illusion of perfection, but they cannot replace loyalty, trust, or love. My daughter's eyes had regained a spark of clarity. She was no longer the anxious, uncertain young woman I had seen pacing the ruined hall. She understood more than ever that her life and her happiness could not be tied to someone who saw relationships as a transactional game. Daniel, on the other hand, began to realize the full scope of his actions. Calls and messages from former friends and acquaintances turned cold. The important people he had so carefully invited were unimpressed. Their respect never truly gained. Social circles whispered about the disaster, recounting the arrogance that had caused so many to be humiliated. Everywhere he turned, the reality of what he had done confronted him. The lavish wedding, the money, the carefully planned image, all meaningless in the face of true human judgment. For once, Daniel was powerless. The consequences he had ignored were now unavoidable. My daughter and I began to focus on rebuilding, not the wedding, but the emotional foundation that had been shaken. We laughed again, cooked together, and even joked about how absurd the events had been. She learned to value what truly mattered: relationships, integrity, and the people who loved her unconditionally. I realized that this experience, painful as it was, had strengthened our bond. We could see the world more clearly now, with sharper judgment and stronger instincts. And for me, it was a lesson in patience, resilience, and the subtle power of standing firm in the face of arrogance. Meanwhile, Daniel's social circles were quietly crumbling. Invitations he had assumed would guarantee him respect were revoked, and his reputation suffered quietly but irreversibly. People he had considered allies avoided him, reluctant to associate with someone who had humiliated so many. His attempts to regain control were futile, and though I didn't take pleasure in his discomfort, I could not deny the sense of justice that unfolded naturally. Arrogance, unchecked, had consequences. Pride, when meeting reality, can fall harder than any financial loss. One evening, as my daughter and I sat on the porch watching the sun set, she turned to me. "Dad," she said softly, "I don't want to dwell on him anymore. I want to focus on life, on real happiness. But I think he'll never forget what happened." "And that's okay," I nodded, holding her hand. "Exactly. Some lessons are harsh, but they stay with you forever. And sometimes the only way someone learns is through the consequences of their own actions." Her smile returned fully that evening, genuine and unguarded. We didn't need a lavish wedding to remind us of our strength or our values. The ordeal had taught her and me that dignity, respect, and love are priceless. The storm had passed, and though scars remained, the horizon looked brighter than ever. Daniel had lost much more than money. He had lost credibility, respect, and the trust of everyone around him. And my daughter, she had gained wisdom, resilience, and clarity about what she deserved in life. In the end, the $100,000 wedding may have vanished, but the lessons, the truths, and the bonds that endured were worth far more. Sometimes, life doesn't reward extravagance or status. It rewards honesty, integrity, and the courage to stand up when it matters most. And in that quiet, reflective moment, I knew one thing: this story, painful as it was, had prepared us for a future filled with real respect and real love, values no arrogance could ever erase. The days that followed felt almost surreal. The grand wedding that had promised so much joy had vanished, leaving only lessons, reflections, and the unmistakable truth: arrogance can never outweigh integrity. My daughter and I rebuilt quietly. We didn't need extravagance, cameras, or applause. We found happiness in the small things: laughter over a shared meal, stories late at night, and a sense of peace that Daniel's showy plans could never have provided. I reflected often on what had happened. The man who had believed he could manipulate people with money and status had learned the harshest lesson of all: respect cannot be bought. It cannot be staged, and it cannot be faked. Daniel had lost far more than he could ever calculate: the trust of family, the loyalty of friends, and the dignity he had thought came with wealth. And while I didn't rejoice in his downfall, I acknowledged that some lessons need to hit hard to leave a lasting impression. For my daughter, the experience transformed her. She understood now that her worth, and the worth of those around her, could never be measured in dollars or important titles. Strength, clarity, and the courage to stand against arrogance became her true inheritance. And for me, I learned something fundamental. Patience, observation, and timing often outweigh confrontation. Sometimes silence is the sharpest weapon, and truth is the ultimate revenge. Life has a way of revealing who truly matters and who does not. In the aftermath, we realized that the love, respect, and loyalty we shared were far more valuable than any $100,000 wedding or public display. Daniel, he will never forget this. The arrogance that once seemed untouchable was now humbled, a reminder that reality has a way of catching up to those who overestimate their own importance. Friends, this story is a reminder: no matter how much someone spends or how much power they think they have, respect and integrity cannot be bought. If this story moved you, or if you've ever witnessed someone's arrogance collide with reality, like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Mind's Sweet Revenge for more real-life stories that reveal the truths money and pride cannot hide. Comment below: what would you have done if you were in my place? Would you stay silent, or would you make sure the lesson was learned? Remember, sometimes the quietest actions leave the loudest impact, and truth always finds a way.